Hi, my name's Dan, and in this video we're going to run through setting up BookStack on a fresh Ubuntu LTS server, and then we're going to upgrade that to have HTTPS support. There's a couple of things that I've done ahead of time. One of those is that I've purchased a domain, and we're going to use that domain to point to our instance later on, and we're going to set that up as wiki.bookstackapp.com. And then I've also created a Linode account, because that's where we're going to create our server instance on Linode. So let's jump into it. I'm going to head over to the node, and we've currently got nothing in here, it's all empty. So let's create a new instance. Again, we're going to be creating this on Ubuntu 20.04 LTS. LTSs are generally better if you're setting up something for a server. As the name suggests, long-term support. They're supported for a bit longer. And then I'm going to select a region. I'm going to go London, UK, because that's the nearest location available to me. On the node plan, we've got a whole range of options with various different resources. But I'm going to go to shared CPU, and I'm going to choose the absolute cheapest one, the Linode 1 GB, because that's plenty for a BookStack instance until you grow to quite a significant amount of people using it at a single time. Let's go down, and let's give this a label, Stack Wiki. But you can enter whatever you want there. Now I'm going to enter a root password, so make sure this is really nice and secure, as this is what you're going to be accessing the server with potentially. And then I have already added my SSH key to my Linode account, so I'm going to enable that for easier access later on. But it's not a requirement if you haven't, or if you're not familiar with SSH keys. And there's a few other settings down here, such as backups. Probably a very good idea if you're setting this instance up for real, to enable that, because it's an easy way to have common backups. But in this case, I'm going to delete this instance after making this video, so I'm not going to go ahead and press that option. But let's go and create our Linode instance. There we go. So it's currently being provisioned, so it's not accessible yet, but it does give us the IP address, which is very useful. So I'm going to use that to set up our domain. So I'm going to jump over to my domain name provider. So I use Namecheap. This is my control panel for my domain, bookstackapp.com. But all of these look different for whatever service you use, and that's going to really be dependent on your own, whatever service that you bought your domain from. I'm going to hit add new record, and it's going to be an A name record, because we're pointing a specific name to an IP address. And again, I want this to be wiki.bookstackapp.com, so I'm going to put in the wiki there and add our IP address from the Linode. So I copied that from here, put that into there, and hit save changes. So then this is going to point wiki.bookstackapp.com to that IP address of the Linode machine instance. I would recommend, if you're doing this, try not to go to that domain in your browser ahead of time, just to see if it's already on something, because that can often be cached then in your browser, and then it causes all kind of awkwardness and it's a bit slower to change when you want to point it to your Linode instance. And the same goes for if you're changing an existing subdomain. So if this wiki.bookstackapp was already in use and I was pointing at something else, that can take a significantly longer amount of time to then roll out across the internet for it to be accessible at that domain. So sometimes if something's not working for a while, you might just have to wait for the domain change to propagate out across the internet. But otherwise, if it's a fresh one, generally it can only takes a matter of minutes to be first usable. Let's jump over back to the node now and see if that's done. Cool, that's now running. Now there's a couple of ways we can access this. So I prefer just straight up using terminal and SSH, which gives us a handy little direct command there. If I open up a terminal on my machine, I can paste that in. Say that I trust that address. And then I'm into the machine because I pre-configured my SSH key earlier. If you're not familiar with SSH or you don't have a terminal ready to go on your machine, if you're on a Windows machine specifically, it can be more tricky. Linode have a terminal built right into the interface. So you can click that, say launch this LISH console, and then we'll let that load. And via this kind of console, it's not key-based, so because we added our SSH key earlier, that means we can access it without having to enter in a username or a password, which was a bit easier. But via this, it will ask us for a username and password once it is finally done setting up. So at the moment, it's just going through this process of giving us access through this console. But give it a moment, and it will be ready. Just gotta wait for this part to complete. And there we go. It's asking us for a login. And by default, on a fresh instance, at least on the node, that will be root. And then password will be the password that you entered when you set up the machine. And then you'd be into the instance there. But again, I prefer to use my own system terminal, so I'm going to close that and then jump back to my terminal screen. So now our machine is running and we've got access. Great, now we need to install BookStack. We can do that, but if we go to the BookStack website, hit install, and then it shows us a range of options here. And one of those is Ubuntu 20.04 script. We go down to here and then we can follow these commands to install BookStack onto this machine. So let's do that. So this command will download the installation script, and this one makes it executable, and then we'll run the command or run the script using this command. So when you run it, it's going to ask you what domain you want to host BookStack at. You can use an IP address for this if you really wanted to, if you didn't have a domain, but you will have to change some things later on down the line. But for this instance, we have our domain ready to go, which is wiki.bookstackapp.com. Just double check this, make sure it's absolutely right before you hit enter. Wiki.bookstackapp.com in my case, and hit enter. There we go. And now you just got to leave this to run until it stops doing anything. You see a kind of a success message at the end to confirm that it's already set up, which we'll see in a second. While this is going, I'm just going to go back to this installation page. And just to reiterate, this installation script is intended for a completely fresh operating system, a completely fresh Ubuntu 20.04 installation. Since it does quite a lot of things like install databases, install web servers, it could interfere with anything that's already on the system. If you do already have a system that you might be using but you want to install BookStack on, then what you can do, which can be handy, is to click through on this link to installation script. And then this is exactly what we're running right now. But you can go through here and then it's every section of this is all commented up. So you could go through this and just maybe run the parts that you know might be required or won't conflict on your machine, or you could even download this and then make tweaks to it and then run that customized version of it that's suited to your machine. But otherwise, yeah, just confirm it is for a completely fresh instance. Jump back. We can see this is still running, so we'll leave this to run and then we'll pick back off once it's got to the end. All right, and now we've got to the end. We can see the setup finish message, and it gives us the default login information of admin@admin.com and password of password. And it says we can access that at the IP address or at the domain that we've set up. So we'll click through on this domain. And there we go. Looks like it's running. Looks good. So let's try and log in. Admin.com is the default. Type in password. And we have access. Of course, one thing that you should do fairly immediately is go to edit profile. Let me just zoom in. And then change the password for this account, just to make sure that you don't leave it up and running with the default information, especially once you start filling it with private confidential information. So make sure you go ahead and do that. And let's just make sure that everything's all running as expected. So we'll create a new book. Let's take a look. We'll create a page. And let's upload an image and make sure that's working okay. There's a cute cat. Perfect. You create a page with an image. All seems to be operating fairly well. So that's our instance. But as you can see in the URL bar, it's currently showing as insecure. And that's because we do not have HTTPS running on this server yet. It's all over standard HTTP non-encrypted connection. So let's get this set up with HTTPS. This process is made fairly easy by Certbot and Let's Encrypt, which is a great project to make it super free and easy to set up HTTPS. So we'll go to their website. So if you just search for Certbot, come across this, or it's the URL certbot.eff.org. You'll come to this, and then if we go down to here, and it's got these drop downs, we can say my HTTP website is running. Under software, we want to go Apache, at least as of time of recording. That's what's used by the BookStack installation script. And we are running on Ubuntu 20.04. Perfect. And then we can scroll down and it provides us nice, easy instructions. So we can SSH into the server, which we've already done. And then install snapd. Now by default, this is already installed on a lot of Ubuntu BPS instances. So I'm just going to skip that step. But if you have any issues with the next command, probably go back to that one, just in case snapd isn't installed. But I'm going to jump ahead to step number 3 and copy this command. Paste that in, give that a run. Cool. So that's finished. It says remove any Certbot Auto and any Certbot OS packages. Again, this is really meant if you've tried to install Certbot by other means before, you had an old version of it installed, to remove that. But again, this is a completely fresh instance, so I'm going to skip over that command and go straight to 5, which is the install Certbot command. Copy that. There we go. That's installed. Then we'll run this command, which makes it easier for us to run it on the terminal. Perfect. And now let's actually run Certbot and get ourselves HTTPS. So we'll ask for an email address there in my email for when it comes up to getting close to renew the certificate, or if there's urgent security information to know about. But otherwise, it is good to put a legitimate address there just in case they need to contact you. There has been instances in the past where they contacted me saying, hey, we've made changes. As of tomorrow, you're going to need to do a manual renewal. So it's worth putting something legitimate in there. Again, this is just a demo though, so I'm going to do like that. Yep, I agree to those. Alright, it seems to not like that email address. Bear with me, I'm just going to rerun that command and enter a more legitimate address. So yep, we agreed to the terms and conditions. Do we want to share our email address? Not in this case. And then it asks you what domain would you like to activate? Yes, for. So we only got one option, so we're going to enter in one there, which is wiki.bookstackapp.com. Put in one because that's what aligns with it. And that's going to request a certificate for that domain. And then, yep. Then that looks like it's all been successful. Got some red text there, but that's just to warn us that they've added a rewrite in addition to some other rules for a web server. But otherwise, we should be able to go back to our instance. HTTPS. And there we go. So you'll see this to begin with. So BookStack is loading, but it's loading in a kind of a broken way. And that's because a lot of the resources used in BookStack are still pointing to the old non-HTTPS site, which causes this, which means they can't be accessed because you're trying to access non-secure resources over a secure connection, which is why I'm saying this is not secure. Parts of it, such as images, are not secure. So we're going to need to make a little bit of a change on the BookStack side to work with HTTPS. So if we jump back into the terminal, and we need to go to our BookStack installation directory, which is typically via the installation script. It's var www/bookstack. And then within here, all of our configuration, at least on the server side, is within a file called .env. So let's edit that. nano.env to edit that file. And we've got some information in here. Then one of those bits of information is the app URL, which can be found here. So you can see this is still HTTP. We just need to update that simply with HTTPS. Then we're going to press Control O to write that, save that, and then Control X to then exit out. So let's go back to our page, give that a refresh, and there we go. Everything's loading absolutely perfectly, but we still do have a warning up here saying connection is not secure, parts of this page are not secure. And that's to do with this image. So there's a lot of content within BookStack. Once you start adding content into the system, it will use the domain that's configured, the one that we've just tweaked there. But those details are now, when we previously used it, details from our usage then are now in the database, and we need to update the database with our change. This isn't something you need to do if you have a completely fresh instance. We only need to now do this next step because we added existing content. Again, typically I wouldn't really care about this too much because that's just a test page. But I just want to go through the process so you know what that looks like if you have to run it on your side. Again, within the BookStack installation directory, we need to run a command, and that is hp artisan bookstack :update URL. And then this takes two options, an old URL and a new URL of what you're changing it to. So our old URL is going to be http wiki.bookstackapp.com, and our new URL is going to be https wiki.bookstackapp.com. We're going to run that. It's going to confirm those details. This will search for http wiki.bookstackapp.com in your database and replace it with https wiki.bookstackapp.com. So that all looks fine. And then, yeah, this command can do some damage if used badly. So make sure you've got a backup if you have already stored a whole bunch of content in there. Again, this is just a test instance and it's a fresh one as well, so I don't really I'm not too fussed. I'm going to hit yes. So you can see here it's updated a few rows in the database. We go back to here and refresh. It now gets rid of that warning, and then we're fully HTTPS secure, and we can now go ahead and start using our BookStack instance. Now there's a few things that we haven't covered in this guide, major of which is how to secure your VPS instance. There's usually a few things you'd want to do, such as blocking off the root user that we're using to log in, and then use a less privileged user where necessary. But that's kind of out of the scope of this guide. Just search for Ubuntu server hardening guide, and there's lots of good information out there on the internet. In terms of BookStack itself, there's a few security steps that you might want to run through. And you can see those by if you head over to our documentation, and then there's a security page. And this page has a whole bunch of steps and a whole bunch of information that you just might read through in terms of authentication, how content is stored, and things like that. If you have any issues at all, feel free to jump into our Discord. That's probably the best place to get support. It's fairly active. We have a support channel in there, and there's usually messages on there daily. So just feel free to jump in and request support from the community that's in there. But otherwise, I think that's everything that I have to cover. Good luck with your instance, and have a great day.